Welcome to the Antidote, where we're turning the tables on your media landscape. This is Greg McCarran.
And this is Jeremy Rothkushel.
Well, Jeremy, you've had a chance to, I guess, take a little bit of time off from this never-ending media circus, both on the mainstream and the so-called alternative media that is the Trump presidency and Trump administration. And I had a chance when we were when you were gone. I had a chance. I did a program did a recording with our friend Joseph Davis at talpiottalk.com regarding following up on some of the information from the LaRousse organization as well as other sources over the years that are linking together a long-term, going back to the Reagan administration, a nest, you might call it, of the Soviet, of what I believe the LaRousse organization described as the Soviet Israeli network of operatives that acted within the Reagan administration, carried on to the Bush administration, and now I do fear in a lot of ways are involved in the Trump administration. And you can go and check that out on Joseph's YouTube channel, Talpiot Talk. So I would recommend that. And also, I was able to do a solo recording where if you recall, in the last show we did on our 9/11 to 11/9 series, which, by the way, we plan on going back to pretty soon. I think this week we're going to take a little deviation away from that, even though what I think we're talking about today is going to have is very much related to this entire 9/11 to 11/9 series we've been doing. It's going to focus more, I think, on the 11/9 aspect and certainly the Donald Trump factor in this whole thing. But we're going to go back to that series, I think, pretty soon. But I did have a chance to do a solo recording where I followed up when I ran out of time on the last show we did together, talking about tying kind of a connection together between the Eagle Gateway Forum and General Flynn receiving an award, the John Singlob Award, and then tying in Singlob's long-standing connections to the Council for National Policy as well as to Oliver North and the Iran-Contra scandal, and then the connection where we kind of tied together, which you've identified perhaps being the two main think tanks that are really influencing the Trump administration. One would be this Council for National Policy, CNP, which is the domestic arm of the right wing of the Republican Party, and also the Center for the National Interest. And where this ties together is via, say, someone like a Maria Bukova, or is it Butina? I keep forgetting. Is it Butina or Bukova?
Butina.
I believe it's Butina. Okay, Maria Butina, this Russian operative who was involved in financial chicanery with the then president of the National Rifle Association, David Keene, who went on to be the head of the editorial editor of the Washington Times, a very influential Council for National Policy publication, and also her personal appeal to one Maurice Hank Greenberg of AIG infamy, who is a board member for the Center for the National Interest, which advocates basically better relations with Russia. So I was able to tie that together, and while that doesn't definitively prove anything nefarious, I do think it certainly shows that a lot of these networks, both domestically and internationally, do run in the same circles, and they very much have a lot of working interconnecting through these various networks, both domestically and internationally. And I think that is a good lead-in to what we're going to talk about today, and that is some of the circumstances that were really not being discussed in the mainstream or so much of the alternative media, which I think has been it's absolutely shameful the way that the alternative media has covered the nomination of one Brett Kavanaugh. And I think when we're going to go with this program, when we're going to talk about Brett Kavanaugh, I think figures a lot into both these domestic networks and these international networks. And I think the Brett Kavanaugh case is an epicenter where all of these various interests surrounding Donald Trump and the election of him, both from a domestic perspective and an international perspective, that we've been discussing for months now. I think all of these networks come together, and the Kavanaugh nomination appears to be a big epicenter for all of these interconnected think tanks, individuals, and activism circles. So, Jeremy, I'm going to let you. Where do you want to start out when we're discussing this Brett Kavanaugh? Because I know you've got a lot of strong opinions about what we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, it might make sense to do follow up on what you're talking about this CNP and the CNI and your solo show and all of that, because of course, what are the networks that are leading the charge for Kavanaugh right now? Of course, one of them is QAnon. That's very blatant, right? But there's also Alex Jones, there's Breitbart, and there's really these CNP hooked into alt-right type networks that are really leading the way on this.
Jeremy, it is kind of funny how QAnon and Alex Jones and Jack Posobiec and Jerome Corsi, they're all like allegedly exposing each other, but they all have indistinguishable views when it comes to Kavanaugh or pretty much any other issue of consequence when it comes to Trump.
So maybe it makes sense to fill out a little bit about this Flynn connection here that you brought out in relationship to him winning the John Singlaub Award, and then in the midst of that, it was picked up on by such QAnon interpreters like Jordan Sather at Lift the Veil that Michael Flynn had signed his book. Which, by the way,
Sather is Destroying the Illusion. Just wanted to.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah,
okay.
Sorry,
No problem.
Yes, Destroying the Illusion, and picking up on this picture of the signed book of Michael Flynn, where he used what's used as the QAnon sort of war phrase or rallying cry, really, in terms of where we go one, we go all. And yet all along the way, it seems where we go one, we go all, as long as you are against the left, as long as you're, put the deep state into the bag of the Democrats mainly and maybe the Bushes. So it's not really where we go one, where we go all. And it's also the case that none of these QAnon people really will even look at what book is it? What is this book that Michael Flynn wrote, and what is it about, and who did he read it with, right? And there you go, and you have Michael Ledeen. And a lot of this hooks back into some of the research that we've done, last year actually in relationship to the men who stand behind, the men behind Michael Flynn. And we brought up Ledeen, and Ezra Cohen Watnick is right in the mix. But then when you even deal with this Kavanaugh situation, let's call it, I was actually called into Sam Cedar's show a few weeks ago and talked about how, of course, the Democrats are going to be soft-wheeling any type of fascist operation, and that this Kavanaugh operation in many ways looks like a RICO, an extension of a mob type operation extending from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and is an extension of the mob ties that intensely surround Donald Trump and these political networks. And I believe that is continuing to be proven out because of the intensity of the they're trying to rush it. The Senator Grassley is trying to rush this through, and Kavanaugh was picked, actually added to a list after Mueller was named to be the special counsel. And so it looks like there are some very specific reasons why Kavanaugh is the intensely dedicated choice of these networks that helped install and help maintain Donald Trump in the White House. But I want to put that aside for 1 second to just point out that Ledeen's wife, Barbara, is all up in the mix throughout this thing. She's not only there in relationship to some of these emails that Kavanaugh, I'm pretty sure it looks like he's lying and deceiving about these stolen emails. So they had a mole inside of some of the senators' offices and were able to steal emails and then pass them on. And Kavanaugh was part of seeing those emails. And Barbara Ledeen was right in the mix of that. And I believe you pointed out, Greg, that Barbara Ledeen is still working on the Senate Judiciary Committee for Grassley. Is that true?
I believe as of at least, the articles that came out in 2017 have said as much, and I don't know if that's changed at this point. I haven't heard about that changing, and that brings up questions of whether or not she has a security clearance and a lot of other things as well. And it is also interesting, another example of how all these networks intertwine with each other. Barbara Ledeen, in her capacity as early as 2015, was looking to try and access to the Clinton server and Clinton emails, and even looking for foreign influence as early as 2015. And she went to Newt Gingrich, who in turn went to Judicial Watch. So there's another example of all of these networks and operatives kind of tying together in this whole very, very extensive web. So I thought that was funny as well, that they all just that it's the Ledeen to Gingrich to Judicial Watch web as well. So
good. I'm glad you fleshed that out. So let's dig a little bit deeper because I think this relates to the show that we did about QAnon more recently. We did an analysis of whether QAnon was a trust. We sort of laid out three potential options for understanding what the phenomena actually is, what the operation actually is. And we recognize that no matter what you think, it's a psychological operation. And everybody being honest knows that. So the question is, what kind of psychological operation is it? So one possibility was trust the plan, which is the hashtag associated with QAnon. And then the other possibility was trust the scam, where it's, some LARPers, live action role players, sort of people from some type of hackers who have some interface with the Chan communities, trying to either, whip up a little bit of support, intrigue, that type of thing, or whether it was the third possible choice, which we titled Israeli Conops Coup. And more, I get the sense in terms of the intensity of the propaganda surrounding this Kavanaugh thing and who's behind it. And there's the Ledeens in the background again. Definitely Barbara's sort of operative up there. That more and more really am leaning really towards that third option here in terms of the intense language about military tribunals and that Lindsey Graham's back and forth with Kavanaugh about military tribunals in relationship to those that support our enemies, which for anybody who's been paying attention to Lindsey Graham is the same thing he's been saying since 9/11 pretty much. Exactly. He's always been a seditious proponent of the sort of domestic angle of the war on terror, which is really to undermine, i.e. sedition, undermine our constitutional institutions here at home, and to turn and to sort of deposit all of that into some nebulous military law that still has not even to this day been able to try the accused of September 11th, more than a decade after some of them have been detained. And so there's that, and there's also the obvious thing that Lindsey Graham has this background of 9/11 treasonous cover-up. I personally put scientific papers in his hand that said if they did not respond to the actual science of this around September 11th and the demolitions of the buildings, that there was definitionally under Article 3, Section 3 of the Constitution that it was treason. And Lindsey Graham accepted it, said, thanks, guy, I appreciate it.
Shame on you, Jeremy. Shame on you.
Yeah. And I called his office weeks later, kept on trying to get an answer, and they finally said, well, Lindsey Graham's going to go with the 9/11 Commission report. I was like, how about the science? How about the scientific evidence? Is he going to look into that? No, he's going with the 9/11 Commission. So we have this kind of thing being put forth by the QAnon networks and even to Alex Jones, where it's like Lindsey Graham is our great new patriot. And maybe he's a lapdog, but he's the lapdog of the great imperial emperor patriot Trump now. And so this is all in the mix. And so more and more, it makes sense to me that someone like Ezra Cohen Watnick, who was all up in the mix in relationship to this Flynn network, could be something in relationship to what this Q phenomena actually is, that it really is a high-level military intelligence operation of some sort. And then thus it makes sense to dig a little bit more into who Ezra Cohen Watnick really is. And so I want to do that first, and then maybe we can go back into Kavanaugh. Is that cool, Greg?
Yes, I would like to, because I've been wanting to discuss this for a while with relation to all this Q stuff. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, there's an article that we looked at last year at Veterans Today titled Exclusive, ISIS, the Mob, and Trump, More History Than We Knew. And I don't want to get deep into it. I just want to pull out the section where they talk a little bit about Michael Flynn and his background. And so I'm going to quickly read through that. So this section is titled The Sting. And by the way, early on in this article, it says that it looks like Putin is nowhere in the mix here. I believe that Veterans Today is wrong about that, but there are some other details here that I think that look to me to be very likely true around Michael Flynn's background here. So I'm going to read through this. The Sting. The CIA came to Obama with a program to take down Iran's economy. Here is how it was going to work, but first some background, and we're never going to have enough background on this one. If you're reading this and you're not a director of an intelligence agency, a high-ranking member of Congress, or even a president, you won't know any of this. You'll see how they got Obama here. Let's clarify this about Michael Flynn. The Russians gave him $60,000 to make an ass of himself in Moscow. And aside, by the way, it wasn't just that. He also, remember when we talked about how he was like the first high-level U.S. military officer to be invited to Russian military intelligence GRU headquarters. So I think that this is where Veterans Today is underplaying this Russian connection.
Yeah. And in addition to that, Flynn was also mainly Russian television was a major disseminator of his message of exposing Obama and Clinton for basically creating ISIS, which played a major role in the narrative that allowed Donald Trump to get elected, was his campaign against ISIS and overturning the criminal foreign policy of the U.S. in terms of Syria and Libya. And also Flynn was at this what appears to be very important RT anniversary event where you had people as diverse as General Flynn, Max Blumenthal, Jill Stein was at this event. And there was, I forget the other one, but I mean, you had all these people that are very, very different parts of the political spectrum that all tie into Russia and this campaign and this election narrative at some level or another, all at this 10th anniversary event, all sitting at this table together. So I thought that was also significant as well with relation to Flynn and Russia. So
true that. Okay, so it does make sense to dig a lot deeper on this Russian angle and really look into the background of the KGB and also all the way back to the Czechs.
Oh, it was Bosman from Russia Insider was at that 10th anniversary event as well, I believe, and he wrote the article for Russia Insider about why people should listen to the alt-right when it comes to Zionism and questions related to Jewish power. So.
Yes, and in the background there of that event too were multiple Russian Jewish oligarchs who play into this whole scene too. And so it does make sense to look back at this question of active measures in relationship to U.S. politics. And we've done a little bit about that in terms of talking about the way that there was an accentuation of U.S. Legitimate civil rights issues here at home that were then taken advantage of in many ways by Soviet active measures at the time. And then, of course, there's where it intensifies the Soviet-Israeli angle, as you and Joseph really drilled down on in the recording that you all did together, and how these are the kind of players that are right in the mix there to this day, and it has accentuated this relationship between aspects of the U.S. and so-called national security apparatus, the highest levels of the Israeli so-called national security apparatus, and right into the Russian oligarch mob networks, but also Putin's government. So back to this article. Let's clarify this about Michael Flynn. The Russians gave him $60,000 to make an ass of himself in Moscow. Turkey gave him $500,000, that we see, and oh yes, he's still on their payroll. We believe he was still on their payroll while he was working in the White House. He was certainly still being paid by the Turks when candidate Trump sent him to the CIA for the top secret briefing that he passed on to a foreign intelligence agency. We believe that Flynn was picked up by the Mossad when he was in Afghanistan. We find what our sources tell us is a pure Mossad handler in his personal retinue who shadowed Flynn from the DIA all the way into the Trump White House. We're going to go back to 2011 now. Flynn was just moved into Obama's Office of National Intelligence, groomed for this position, we are told, by 2 foreign intelligence agencies, neither of them Russian. A year later, and they may be wrong about that, a year later, Obama was to put Flynn in, although by the way, on the record, it looks like this sort of the Russian connections with Flynn do come later than that, but they are very much there too. Back to the story. A year later, Obama was to put Flynn in charge of the Defense Intelligence Agency based on the recommendation of traitors that surrounded Obama during his entire presidency. This was an act that he would regret within months, as not only was Flynn unstable and buffoonish, but it quickly became clear as Americans' foreign policy was forced to move further and further from Israel and Turkey. Flynn was serving another master. Here's how they set Obama up. And let's remember, Obama was the only member of Congress to call the Bush administration and CIA out for lying on Iraq. He would never be given an inch. Worse still, the mechanisms put in place post 9/11 were nearly impossible to resist. The surveillance state, America, and its crusade against Islam, no matter what Obama would say or do, policy continually returns to the narrative established by 9/11. Once the narrative of a clash of civilizations was created and Obama decided out of national unity to accept the veil of falsehood, he inherited as an operational reality. America became a runaway train. Obama knew Iran had no nuclear weapons, but when the CIA brought in Felix Sater's plan, he believed he was going to gain the friendship of powerful key Republican policymakers by pretending black was white and up was down, something he became famous for. So, with the newly minted Michael Flynn at his side on the payroll of Turkey or Israel or both, the White House okayed a plan to defraud Iran of billions of dollars. Trump's handler is, of course, Ezra Cohen, or also known as Ezra Cohen Watnick, a 30-year-old Israeli who has shadowed Flynn from the DIA and right into the White House. It was Cohen that burned Flynn to Congress and the FBI. As to the why, who ordered what, all the evidence is not in. We believe Cohen worked as an intelligence go-between with Turkey and Israel, where Flynn had 2 masters, and as we have stated over and over, neither of them Russia. Veterans Today reported on this issue in 2010, a report that eventually led to Azerbaijan ending military occupation with Israel in 2012 after demands from Iran. So there's that. And it is interesting. They earlier in this article they also report on Tevfik Arif, Tevfik Arifov, I think is the original name, and his closeness to his Turkish background and closeness to Erdogan networks. And it is interesting that there's these connections also with Giuliani in the mix.
Yeah.
To
you kind of get the impression. I know with regards to Syria, you've speculated the possibility that we hypothesized the possibility there could be a good cop, bad cop going on with regards to Israel, the U.S., and Russia. In Syria, it almost appears perhaps to be that way with regards to Turkey as well, as you have the obviously very anti-Erdogan networks are very vocal within elements of the media and within think tanks, but you also do have this pro-Turkey, pro-Erdogan nexus as well. So it seems that there might be another case of good cop, bad cop going on there possibly as well with the handling of Turkey at this point too. So
yeah, and more, it looks to me like Erdogan does these like fake opposition to Israel, and whereas there was an actual oppositional party, I believe, and a leader and leadership before Erdogan, who I believe was sort of like overtaken by Erdogan. So I more and more I can see that it's a sort of it represents a lot of the theater that we see around such things as the relationship to like the alt-right and sort of anti-Jewish networks to Netanyahu's Israel. A lot of it is fake opposition of some sort.
And it also appears that, and one more thing regarding Turkey, it also appears that originally, Turkey was said to be the enemy of Syria and was on the side of those who were trying to destroy it. Now, with Russia kind of coming in, this power play that's taken place, this shift to Russia, it almost seems that Turkey has shifted with it.
Yes. So, all right. So let's dig a little bit more into Ezra Cohen Watnick, because it's very interesting that it's said that Barbara Ladine is the one who brought together Flynn and Ezra Cohen Watnick. But then there's these couple articles that have popped up from back when Ezra then Cohen was actually in college, right? And so one of them is titled, it's from the Daily Pennsylvanian. It's titled $5.5 million Goal Set for New Lubavitch Center. With number of participants rising, Chabad community aims toward major expansion, by Jasmine Salters. And this is from October 31st, 2007. And so it talks about how there's going to be a building out of the Lubavitch House. The Perelman Center for Jewish Life will house the Lubavitch House at Penn, as well as the Steinhardt Kane Jewish Heritage Program. So there you have mega, right? Steinhardt. Okay. The new site was officially announced and celebrated at a groundbreaking ceremony last week. Okay. Then you go down in here. And the center is named after its benefactor, billionaire Ronald Perelman, he's an interesting character too, and people should go look him up. And we believe that he was also on the list of Netanyahu's donors that we've covered before, right, Greg?
Yes, he was on the first list, the list of most likely donors, listed right underneath Sheldon Adelson.
So this more and more, of course, this is as I asked Michael Glassner when he was at the Dole Institute right after the so-called election. The final thing, as he ducked into the green room to avoid me and avoid my questions about Epstein and Trump, I said, is this a Netanyahu operation? Because one of the other guys there, who I believe is also coming to the surface again, is one John McLaughlin, the pollster who came right out of working with Netanyahu and straight into the Trump campaign. So more and more, this is some kind of Netanyahu operation, is what it looks like.
Yes.
And so then it quotes, it says, Rabbi Levin and the Lubavitch House support us, added Wharton Jr. Ezra Cohen said. The new center will be a great success. Okay. So Ezra Cohen, then, before he was Ezra Cohen Watnick, is right in the mix here with the Lubavitch House, right? Lubavitch, the Chabad Lubavitch House, which of any singular organization really ties together this globally in many ways, right? From Burrell Lazar and Putin or to all of these Russian Jewish oligarchs that are very much close to Trump and the family, including the Lev Levayevs and all those guys, but then of course also into Israel and back into the United States, and Felix Sater, recognized by his local Chabad house as the Jew of the year or something like that. And so this is right in the mix. So this is interesting. So you have Ezra Cohen Watnick as some type of Lubavitcher, all right?
Yes.
And this might really be the QAnon network that we're looking at in many ways. It makes a lot of sense to me, especially if you think about, Israel is last, is what they keep saying. Right?
Yeah, right.
And so that almost seems like making fun of the goy. I almost get that sense of it. Like, keep on waiting, and whether you get the word from whether it's Robert David Steele or Jerome Corsi, it keeps on being put off. And, eventually we're going to see, we just need to sort of get past this, midterms and get the red wave of the mid. No. Maybe it'll be in the end of Trump's second term is when we'll finally see the payoff, So.
Maybe 30 years now, Eric or Donald Jr. will run for president and they'll finish the job. But, it is funny that you mentioned that. Oh, it is funny you mentioned that, and that Q can basically, we're saving Israel for last. But in the meantime, enjoy all these articles from Breitbart and from Robert Spencer's Jihad Watch.
Yes, exactly.
It's like Robert's. Hey, they're going to tell us the truth about the Muslim Brotherhood infiltration of our government, and Q will happily post that.
And so then there's this article too that's key to this. I found it on a web archive, and it's a Newsweek article. By Jeff Stein, actually, in Spy Talk. Ezra Cohen Watnick, Inside the Rise of Trump's Invisible Man in the White House. And we should remember that Ezra Cohen Watnick was pushed out, right? He was almost impossible to get rid of. He's 30 years old, and yet he's at the head of he's the running intelligence for the National Security Committee, counselor. And that was seen as widely, out of the norm. And then he's very difficult to get out there, and he's sort of the key, nodal point with Devin Nunes in relationship to the passing of documents around and the framing of what's being seen in the Q movement in many ways as this key moment to try to declassify all of this, the reasons for the FISA court subpoenas for spying, basically.
Yes.
And it's meant to be that the revelation of that, if Trump will just do it, that's going to bring the deep state cabal down. And so it turns out that Ezra Cohen Watnick is this key player in terms of supplying this kind of information to one Devin Nunes, and building up a whole architecture of beliefs around that. And so then look at this article, this Newsweek article. You get down in there, and it gives you a little bit of his background, which is very, very interesting. But we'll link this, and people can read the whole thing. It talks about the whole Flynn McMaster sort of complication in relationship to McMaster taking over, and then McMaster trying to get Ezra Cohen out. So, and then it says here, from string bean to spook, Ezra Cohen Watnick's unlikely journey from Chevy Chase's liberal cocoon to backroom shenanigans of the Trump White House was less a straight shot than a dotted line. It may well have begun with Frank Gaffney, who, by the way, is recognized by some of this analysis of the Jeffrey Steinbergs and other elements that you referenced before as the key, as the epicenter of this Soviet-Israeli spy nest that was deeply penetrated into the highest levels of the U.S. national security way back through the 80s and before even. It may well have begun with Frank Gaffney, back to the story, a former Ronald Reagan administration official who has emerged as a leading conspiracy theorist and believes that Muslim militants have infiltrated the U.S. government and even the Republican Party. At Bethesda Chevy Chase High, Cohen Watnick was close to Gaffney's daughter. As the years went by, he gravitated to Gaffney's associates, who eventually took him into the White House. There you go. So just one more paragraph here. Cohen Watnick was a sophomore on September 11, 2001, when al-Qaeda militants flew hijacked airliners into the World Trade Center and Pentagon. BS. Okay, but that's an aside. The attacks prompted a wave of patriotic fervor among young people who volunteered in droves for the military services and intelligence agencies. The affable string bean teenager was too young to enlist, but he joined his high school's Tiny Young Republicans Club, and at the University of Pennsylvania, where he enrolled in 2004, he signed up for the Naval Reserve Officers Training Course, according to a 2006 account in the daily school paper, The Daily Pennsylvanian. Quote, "It was very important to him to be able to give back to something that he has benefited from. In this case, the national security that has kept generations of his family safe," the paper said. And okay, and then last paragraph. Cohen's professed patriotism found other outlets at Penn. He joined the members-only Union Club, quote, "Philadelphia's iconic bastion of GOP conservatism," unquote, according to a local columnist. But Cohen was also moving beyond the conservative mainstream. In 2007, he helped organize a campus Terrorism Awareness Week, originally called Islamofascism Awareness Week, in concert with David Horowitz, a close Gaffney ally whose crusade against liberal, quote, liberal elites, unquote, on campus has been supported by top Trump aides Kellyanne Conway and Steve Bannon. CNP, right, Greg? Well,
yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Yes, indeed.
Council on National Policy. At some point, back to the story, a close family friend recalls asking for anonymity in exchange for talking about personal matters. Gaffney offered the budding young hawk internships at his D.C. think tank, the Center for Security Policy. Gaffney tells Newsweek in a brief telephone interview that he barely recalls Cohen Watnick from as a high schooler and has had no contact with him since. So
funny, no one will talk about him. No one will talk about him, from Steve Bannon to Donald Trump himself to Jared Kushner to Frank Gaffney. No one would say anything about him.
Exactly. And then we'll just link the Daily Pennsylvanian story that backs up that story, titled Terrorism Debate Raises Course Questions. 3 profs speak at Terrorism Awareness Week panel event from October 23rd, 2007, I believe. And I believe, So college senior Ezra Cohen said that, quote, "We need people to be passionate about the problem of terrorism. Terrorism needs to be a standard on Penn's campus, not the exception. Otherwise, there won't be any progress," unquote. So.
Yeah, so I'm glad we're getting a chance to talk about this, because I did allude to this a little bit when I was talking about like the factor of the, Michael Flynn signing these books with this Q hashtag, and then, then Jack Posobiec, who's quote unquote exposing Q on the One America News Network, appearing together, both being speakers at this Eagle Forum Gateway Pundit Conference, where Michael Flynn won this John Singlaub Award for service to his country. And I did talk about this a little bit. I'm going to go a little more into this because, I'm not going to definitively say that Ezra Cohen Watnick or any other person's QAnon. I would not do that. But I will say there is a lot of, I think you can make a case that that this QAnon thing is a direct result of this factional warfare, I guess you'd call it, within the deep state, so to speak, and that it did it did coincide and follow in a very short period we might call it the purging of these hawkish National Security Council people that were close allies of Flynn's. Not only Ezra Cohen Watnick, but you also had a guy named Derek Harvey who drafted this memo about the deep state and media that's promoting like globalism that I think InfoWars, among other outlets, really picked up on big time. But it does appear that in the process of the purging of these Flynn allies after Flynn himself was forced out, that you did see this, and I put this together where you saw this convergence of media, right-wing Zionist media attacks on H.R. McMaster, which very, very almost immediately followed an article coming out from Mark Levin, another key player in this whole CNP Zionist pro-Israel nexus media nexus. Mark Levin's conservative review website, August 2nd, 2017, publishes an article, Ezra Cohen Watnick removed from the National Security Council. And then within a 1-week period, you have Carolyn Glick, of the associate editor of the Jerusalem Post and writer for Breitbart, asserting that McMaster is anti-Israel. You've got the Zionist Organization of America demanding that Trump remove H.R. McMaster because he's a Soros puppet. He's anti-Israel. And you also had the same talking points come out from Breitbart, from Jack Posobiec, from Mike Cernovich, from Roger Stone at InfoWars, who made the statement that he had received information from high-ranking Israeli intelligence that McMaster speaks to George Soros. And so you had this real convergence of all of these major players in shaping this right-wing pro-Israel narrative within the pro-Trump circles, really kicked up this war via McMaster against the deep state into high gear once Cohen Watnick was removed. And then you had all this talk about the storm and the counter-offensive against the deep state. And also there was an interview a few months ago that was done with Alex Jones and Jerome Corsi. I know they have, at least on the surface, distanced themselves from Q, although I have a narrative that more or less might just be a lot of cover running when Corsi was exposed basically as being an Israeli agent or an agent of this international B'nai B'rith coalition. But Alex Jones made the statement that he's talked to Q himself, that the original Q was military intelligence really close to Flynn. And then Jerome Corsi had dropped in one of his talks that having Ezra Cohen Watnick in the Justice Department, which, by the way, was done on Trump's personal insistence after he was removed from the NSC and served a period of time at Oracle. And then it's like having QAnon himself in the Justice Department. So I think all of this, you can make a case that QAnon was and likely still is, if whatever it is, it does appear to be at some point very much directly into this inner circle of these Flynn-style national security, hardline Zionist, anti-Islam, anti-Iran hawks at a very deep level. I think a strong case could be made for that.
Oh yeah, and because Flynn also has a background not only in in helping run Joint Special Operations Command in terms of live fly on the ground military operations, but he was also tied into Cambridge Analytica also. So he obviously has some facility with things like psychological operations and more at a mass level. And like you pointed out, this whole, this drama around Ezra Cohen Watnick and how it tied into what Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi and Alex Jones were saying in relationship to blatant Israeli intelligence sources. It also tied into one Safra Katz, who's the Israeli-born, I believe she's the CEO of Oracle, and she's the one who put that on the record about saying that H.R. McMaster had, demeaned the president. And then, as you pointed out, then Cohen Watnick, as he gets pushed out of the NSC, he then gets a plush job at Oracle in the D.C. area. And now, as you've also pointed out, as it's been praised by Corsi as almost having Q in the Department of Justice, that Ezra Cohen Watnick has now been placed as the national security advisor to Jeff Sessions in the Justice Department. Which,
of course, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, that hooks directly in too with one Brian Benkowski, who was named to basically, I think, become a deputy in terms of the criminal division in the Justice Department very recently. And Benkowski has a past of having worked on behalf of Mikhail Friedman, Peter Avin, I believe, Alpha Bank. So there you go. There's the Russian connection, and it's of Alpha. Alpha Bank is also the one that was alleged to have had this back channel direct conduit of sort of an IT channel from Trump Tower to Alpha Bank servers in Russia during the campaign. So the foxes are in the henhouse, and Brian Benkowski also is very much tied into this Kavanaugh situation, because last time through, back I think during the W. Bush administration, the same senators, these sort of same Democrat senators who never quite seem to be able to actually identify the level of criminality that's going on here, such as people like Senator from Vermont,
Patrick
Leahy, and the one from Illinois,
Durbin.
They were all questioning whether Kavanaugh was lying last time about whether he was tied into things like questions around torture and surveillance and military contracting and this type of thing. And Brian Benkowski, at that time, he was the one who certified that they did an ethics investigation and got back to the senators, and that Kavanaugh had come up clean.
Yeah. I guess before we start running low on time, I guess maybe we should talk more about Kavanaugh, because you've laid out a couple of I think these all make sense, of major reasons why Kavanaugh appears to be just such someone that this conservative base is just very, very stubbornly, you might say, or still insistent that he get in there despite all of the stuff that's come out against him. And you've laid out a couple of reasons for this, and I think they make a lot of sense. But also you've tied this into we've done some work, and we've tied this into the ex-Justice Anthony Kennedy, who was behind some of the major rulings, which I think have opened the floodgates to a lot of this international oligarchical influence within the Republican Party over the last couple of years.
Exactly. And so I would say there's three main reasons that there's the Kavanaugh is the choice, and in such an intense choice, and that there's no one else that they want other than him. And so we'll just leave aside all of the questions about that. I think there's tons of evidence that he is lying his ass off around the accusations around sexual assault. It's just numerous. And we'll also put aside the whole question of the background of some of his accusers, which should also be put on the table. At the same time, the facts are the facts, and people could have suspicious backgrounds and still be telling the truth about certain facts. But Kavanaugh is, from what I've seen a lot of this, He's lying his ass off around this. And there's a lot of people trying to help him cover it up, including people like Grassley and Lindsey Graham, it looks like to me.
Even George W. Bush is lobbying senators to approve him.
There you go. So what's up with that? Okay, so I think there's three main reasons. The first one is this immediate question about the questions of the unitary executive, as it might have been talked about under the George W. Bush administration, and the powers of the president to be immune from such things as international law, but definitely even in relationship to domestic law. And there are questions coming up to the Supreme Court. And remember, there was a rush to try to get him on by actually today would have been the day they wanted him on for the opening of the next session. And there are cases that are coming up that deal with this question about things like whether the conflict between the federal government and the state governments in relationship to being able to try people for the same crime at both those levels. And this is, of course, where the so-called small government conservatives are somehow going to line up with the federalists, right? And that's the other group that's all behind this. And so there's a question here, I believe, about whether you're going to have someone seated on the court who can get Trump off and be able to justify and back Trump potentially pardoning all of these people who've already been convicted and who are in whether he can do a blanket pardon for all these people, and whether he can eventually pardon himself potentially if this investigation goes all the way. So I think that's probably front and center. But then secondly and thirdly, there's these much wider, bigger issues that are much more long-term in terms of their seditious intent, in terms of breaking down the potentials of the U.S. Republic. And one of them has to do with private military contracting. And we've been following this thread, Greg, since pretty much the beginning of this Trump administration in terms of this, and that we did a show about this too, about this conflict between these sort of so-called privatizers of like that the Eric Princes represent, but even the Steven Feinbergs from the Cerberus Capital who bought the DynCorp, now installed into the in Trump's in National Intelligence Advisory Board, against the McMasters, the military types. And of course, at that point, we identified that there was no good choice between that, but we side with the possibility of still having a republic that's based on oaths to constitutions rather than an international gang of high treason finance mobsters. So that's an aspect of this, and we'll link to a couple articles about this. There's a Twitter thread by Kelly2277 Venture Capital on Twitter talking about 102,000 Bush Kavanaugh docs are about private military contractors. Bush used Kavanaugh to discuss legality of private military contractors as a substitute for legitimate U.S. military because GOP believed there'd be less dissent for war. Okay. So this is there's a lot in the back here.
Shows that they were in the midst of sending military in this war in Iraq, that they were also entertaining other options even then out of fear that it would be easier to sell a war if you didn't have a mass military presence. That's interesting as well.
Exactly. And one other entry on this, Trump and GOP believe Kavanaugh and Bush set legal precedent to use private mercenaries contractors, PMCs, for Iraq war. They want Kavanaugh to legalize this use so Eric Prince, Cerberus, actually, that's how you say it. Cerberus, DynCorp, and other private militaries can take over our legit U.S. military. Okay? Kavanaugh 2003 through 2006 was all about executive power and the ability to outsource to private mercenaries as opposed to the legitimate U.S. military. Mercenaries granted legal immunity. So this, of course, is what is not being dealt with in relationship to almost all of the left press, and definitely the Democrats are not dealing with this key thing. And then the other article that we will link to is one that Jane Mayer wrote in the New Yorker more than 10 years ago called Outsourcing Torture, that gives a lot of the background of this in the wake of September 11th. And then one last thing that we will link to that fills this out is this IsraelPalestineNews.org article from If Americans Knew, Allison Weir's organization, titled Israel Advocate Ravitch Named to Senior Intelligence Post, Planned U.S.-Israel Cyber Project Against BDS. Okay, so this is now what we're dealing with. This is Ravitch was Cheney's aide. She was also worked under Michael Chertoff at his company. So then just right in here, it says Intelligence Advisory Board and Chair Steven Feinberg. The full name of the board is the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, PIAB. According to its website, it is an independent element within the executive office of the President. Right? Okay. The chair of the Intelligence Advisory Board is Stephen A. Feinberg, a hedge fund billionaire, military contractor, and gun manufacturer with a penchant for being secretive. So we've dealt with this in the past. I just want one last thing I want to point out about this is that in one of our previous shows, I pointed out that Ravitch is on the record talking about a replacement to the nuclear umbrella of the Cold War, of the terror umbrella. And this is very much in the realm of Talpiot, right? So go look at all of Joseph Davis' resources at Talpiot Talk to deal with this. And Ravitch proposes creating a UK-US Israeli combine to basically a sort of a mob protectorate for global terrorism is what it is. So this is exactly who is being put into these key positions high up in this alleged nationalist patriot Trump administration.
Something that's very telling about Samantha Ravitch, at least when I did a Google search, the first three results that popped up were Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Chertoff Group, and Washington Institute for Near East Policy. And the first video result is Samantha Ravitch speaking at an Israel Bonds event.
Yes, exactly. And so then leaving that second issue aside, the question of the so-called privatization, the corporatization, the seditious intent in relationship to things like oaths to constitutions and things like that, is this third thing that I think is key here that connects Kavanaugh and his dad to what Kennedy and his father, former Justice Anthony Kennedy and his father were up to too. And this is one article from Alternet titled "Justice Bot?" Justice Kennedy's lobbyist roots might explain his vote on McCutcheon. The court's swing vote swings the wrong way on campaign finance reform cases by Joe Conason at Alternet, April 7, 2014. And so it talks about this McCutcheon case, which really in some way sort of leads up to the Citizens United case, which is crucial, all of this. And like, I think you pointed this out, that Kennedy was the key figure, wrote the decision on that, and was the key figure to basically legalize corruption,
unlimited finance, unlimited money going into political campaigns, and who were the two people that were most responsible for that? Well, David Bossie was the head of Citizens United, and he was the deputy head of Trump's campaign, along with Bannon after the GOP convention, and also the primary lobbyist for this, from a financial perspective, was one Sheldon Adelson.
So after talking about how Kennedy wrote the majority opinion in Citizens United and how it didn't make any how it sounds ridiculous, it says, yet if any Supreme Court justice knows how ridiculous that sounds, it must be Kennedy, whose own background as a corporate lobbyist and son of a lobbyist has been forgotten in nearly 3 decades since his Senate confirmation in 1987. Yes, Kennedy was a respected appellate court judge before Reagan appointed him to the high court, but before that he grew up and then worked as an attorney in Sacramento, California, where his father became a, quote, legendary, unquote, lobbyist in a state capital renowned as, quote, unquote, freewheeling, a polite term that means, quote, routinely corrupt, unquote. His father, Anthony Bud Kennedy, was a backslapping, hard-drinking partner in a powerful lobbying law firm run by one Arthur Artie Samish, the, quote, secret boss of California, unquote, who finally went to prison on tax charges in the mid-1950s while young Tony was studying to enter law school. Samish liked to brag that he had amassed more power than anyone else in the state, including the governor, that he could buy any legislator with a, quote, baked potato, a bottle, or a broad, unquote, and that he could, quote, unelect, unquote, any lawmaker who didn't vote his way. The major clients of Samish and Kennedy were racing, entertainment, and liquor interests, notably Schenley Industries, then owned and run by J. Edgar Hoover's mobbed-up pal Louis Rosenstiel. When Bud Kennedy died suddenly in 1963, young Tony was only 2 years out of law school, but he went into the family business and inherited his late father's clientele. Okay, so this, I just want to point out that this is mob background, right? And this sounds very similar to the way that Michael Cohen sort of takes over some of the mob institutions and papers, but also someone like Felix Sater, right? Looks like he's a second generation sort of taking over from his dad, who was a key lieutenant, allegedly, of Semyon Mogilevich. And so there's a certain amount of the loyalty. And this is what Trump really means. He's a good guy. He's loyal. This is about mob and who you can trust to keep your criminal records at some level. So it does look like that there is this at least two generation Justice Kennedy legacy that links right into deep mob activity via Artie Samish. Okay, there's another key figure here who is titled, name is Murray Chotiner. And he is alleged to have introduced Mickey Cohen, who is Meyer Lansky's key West Coast lieutenant. Keeps popping up at things like the hotel where RFK was shot. He's all over the place. He turns up at the key moments, right? He's also linked into things like the John F. Kennedy assassination, it looks like, in relationship to Jack Rubenstein, right? So that is right there. And you go look and think of such books as like Supermob, how Sidney Korshak and his criminal associates became America's Hidden Power Brokers by Gus Russo. And you look in there and you see that it says, in Los Angeles, Ben Siegel's successor, this is page 80, was in Los Angeles, Ben Siegel's, Bugsy Siegel, successor as the mob's local wire service, Mickey Cohen, was close friends with municipal officers at all levels. Artie Samish, a Cohen childhood friend and California lobbyist who was called more powerful than the governor by Governor Earl Warren, remained a powerful ally of Cohen's. Okay, so then it goes all back there. He said Cohen had the private numbers of the mayor's office and office to boot. He also knew Richard Nixon, who before running for Congress demanded that Cohen come up with a $75,000 contribution to assure Nixon's leniency towards the local bookies. There's other interpretations of this that I want to jump to that actually sort of put it more like Meyer Lansky is the one who's instigating this, along with one with Murray Chotiner, right? Okay, so now I'm going to read from Mr. Mob, The Life and Crimes of Mo Dalitz by Michael Newton. Page 96. In any case, upon arrival in L.A., Cohen assumed his post as Siegel's second in command. He was Bugsy's pit bull, subduing independent bookies and gamblers while Siegel enjoyed the Hollywood high life. Skipping down, California's political boss in those years was Arthur Samish, born in East L.A. and raised in San Francisco. Samish enters politics as a clerk for the state legislature, then lobbied against prohibition on behalf of California's liquor interests, right? And of course, there's also the Bronfmans, right? Remember them.
Indeed.
Governor Earl Warren told reporters that on matters that affect his clients, Artie unquestionably has more power than the governor. Gus Russo, referring to the Supermob book, described Samish as, quote, childhood friend, unquote, of Mickey Cohen. But Samish was a 23-year-old San Francisco resident when Cohen moved to L.A. at age 6. Still, there was a connection. Cohen described his relationship with Samish as followed, unquote, quote, if I had my problems with legislators in Sacramento on things like slot machines on premises, he nipped it in the bud. I was his right hand and he was my godfather, my senior statesman, unquote. The Cohen-Samish introduction may have been arranged by Murray Chotiner, a Pittsburgh native who quit school at 15 and still obtained a law degree. And we only have less than a minute left, but we'll delve more deeply into this because this is also a deep Nixon connection, and connects Nixon to the mob in many ways, Chotiner. And there's even articles about how he's the sort of predecessor of the Trump-based politics about how to attack, like Cohen. And then one last thing I just want to throw into the mix in relationship to Kavanaugh is that Kavanaugh's father was also an industry lobbyist. He worked in things like
cosmetics.
Cosmetics, exactly. Kavanaugh's father, Everett Edward Kavanaugh Jr. was the president of Cosmetic Toiletry Fragrance Association for 2 decades. And so he sat on a board with the Louders, and so had intimate connections, very likely, with one Ronald Lauder also. So there you go. There's that connection again. And we'll link to a whole link of Lauder's connection to these Russian Jewish oligarchs, including things like Alpha Bank teaming up with the Lauder Institute, again, back in Philadelphia, for an award. So I guess until last